The ruthless Alpha King swore he'd never take a mate, rejecting every woman the moon goddess sent him. But when his best friend's hidden-away sister returns to the kingdom, his control shatters as he realizes she's the one destiny chose. Now he must choose between the vow that made him king and the woman who could bring him to his knees. They say the Alpha King's heart is colder than the snow on his mountains. But if you watched him closely, on a night when no one else was looking, you'd see that almost everything he did was to protect a wound he never let heal. Snow drifted over the stone courtyard as King Aldric of the Red Moon Pack walked between two lines of warriors. His crimson cloak snapped in the wind, fur-lined hood shadowing the hard planes of his face. Torches burned along the walls, their orange light licking at the iron and leather of his armor. To most, he looked like a legend carved from ice and steel. The Alpha King who rejected every woman, the ruler the moon goddess herself could not bend. In the center of the courtyard, a young she-wolf stood trembling, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She had been brought from a distant allied pack, another hopeful Luna candidate. Another woman everyone said should be his fated mate. Another heart about to be turned away. Warriors lined the edges, whispering. Servants lingered at the doors. Even the snow seemed to hold its breath. Aldric stopped a few steps in front of her. His golden eyes were calm, unreadable. The girl tried to meet his gaze and failed, her shoulders shaking. She had prepared for this moment her whole life. He could smell her fear, her determination, the faint hope clinging to her like perfume. His wolf, silent for years whenever a woman stood before them like this, remained quiet still. There was no spark, no pull, only emptiness. "You know why you are here," Aldric said, his voice deep and steady. It carried easily across the courtyard without him needing to raise it. "Do you accept the risk of rejection?" Her breath hitched. "Why, yes, Your Majesty." For a long moment, he simply looked at her. He saw not a candidate, not an answer to a prophecy, but a person. Someone who had traveled far, who would carry the weight of his decision back to her parents, to her people. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he shook his head once. "My wolf does not answer you," he said quietly. "You are not my mate." The words were gentle, but they fell like stones in the silence. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd, half disappointment, half dark satisfaction at the story being proven true yet again. The girl stiffened, tears shining in her eyes, but she did not break. She bowed, swallowing hard. "Thank you for your honesty, Your Majesty." Aldric surprised everyone, including the girl, when he stepped closer instead of turning away. He removed one glove, and with a careful dignity that no one expected from such a feared king, placed his bare hand over his heart and bowed his head to her. "You honored my pack by coming," he said, voice low enough that only those closest heard. "Your courage will be remembered long after this day. Captain Remus, you will escort her and her family home with full protection and provisions." The captain straightened. "Yes, my king." In that small act, the harsh lines of prophecy and duty softened for a heartbeat. The girl's tears fell, but there was gratitude in them now. Aldric stepped back, the mask of stone settling across his features once more. As he turned, he caught his beta and oldest friend, Lucien, watching him with a mixture of frustration and quiet understanding. Lucien fell into stride beside him as they left the courtyard. Where Aldric was all controlled intensity, Lucien moved with a relaxed confidence that made warriors feel at ease. His dark hair was tied back, his eyes sharp and curious. "That's the 5th this year," Lucien said under his breath, once they were alone in the shadowed corridor. The castle walls were cold stone lit by flickering torchlight, lined with worn tapestries of battles long past. "The elders are going to explode if you keep this up. You know that, right?" Aldric's boots echoed on the floor. "I will not lie to a woman and claim a bond that doesn't exist," he replied. "Not for the elders, not for anyone." Lucien sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I'm not saying you should, but the pack is restless. They think the moon goddess is angry. No Luna means no heirs, no balance for your power, and they think an alpha without a mate is a beast waiting to lose control. Aldric finished for him, a humorless smile touching his lips. They are not entirely wrong. He said it lightly, but the words sank heavy between them. Lucian's gaze softened. He had been there the night Aldric's control finally snapped, years ago, when his rising alpha strength tore through the battlefield like a storm and left more destruction than victory. No one spoke openly about that night, but everyone felt the shadow of it in the way Aldric held himself so tightly now, as if every breath was measured. "You haven't lost control in years," Lucian said quietly. "You've turned us from a struggling pack into the strongest kingdom in the north. Give yourself some credit, brother." "Discipline is not the same as peace," Aldric answered. "My wolf is quiet, too quiet. If he ever wakes to someone he calls mate," he trailed off, jaw working, "I cannot risk destroying what I'm meant to protect." They reached a tall, arched window that looked out over the valley below. Snowy rooftops of nearby villages glowed with the warm light of hearth fires. Smoke curled into the twilight sky. Beyond, dark forests stretched to the horizon, where the mountains rose like silent guardians. Aldric leaned one hand on the stone, his bare fingers feeling the bite of winter through the open slit. Below, he could just make out villagers moving through the square, children chasing one another, a mother carrying bread, an old man brushing snow from his doorstep. This was why he refused to break, not because he was too proud to accept a mate, but because he had seen what his unchecked power could do. That night had painted the snow red in his memory, even if the real blood had long since faded. He would rather face the loneliness of 1,000 winters than risk ever seeing that again. The moment of quiet was shattered by a distant howl. It was not the long, musical call of a pack running under the moon. It was sharp, urgent, edged with danger. Another howl answered, then a shout rose from the outer wall. Lucian's head snapped up. "Rogues at the eastern ridge," a guard's voice called from down the hall, breathless. "They've crossed the border, Your Majesty." Aldric's wolf stirred at last, not in longing, but in instinctive defense. The king turned from the window, the shift in him so sudden that the air itself seemed to tighten. "Sound the alarm," he said. "Lucian with me." They were already moving before the final word left his mouth. The corridors blurred around them as they ran, boots pounding the stone, cloaks snapping in the wind of their own motion. Servants pressed against the walls as they passed, bowing quickly. The castle doors crashed open, and the cold night hit them like a wave, sharp air, the sting of snow, the metallic taste of coming conflict. From the battlements they saw them, shadows darting through the snowfall at the tree line, figures moving with predatory speed. Rogues, not a full army, but enough to threaten the outer village if left unchecked. Torches flared along the wall as archers took their positions. "Hold the line," Aldric's command rang across the stone, his voice cutting through wind and fear alike. "No one enters the village." He leapt from the battlement to the courtyard below, landing with practiced grace. His wolf surged beneath his skin, bones and muscles humming with restrained power. For years he had avoided full transformation unless absolutely necessary, choosing strategy over raw strength. But tonight, the scent of terrified villagers on the wind, the crack of splintering wood from the outer fence, pushed past that boundary. Snow crunched under his boots as he sprinted toward the gate, Lucian at his side. As they reached it, a small form stumbled inside, a boy no older than 10, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide with panic. He almost collided with Aldric, chest heaving. "Please, Your Majesty," the boy gasped. "My sister, she fell when we were running, she's still out there." A warrior moved to pull the child aside, but Aldric held up a hand. He knelt, bringing himself to the boy's eye level, his imposing presence softening in that one simple act. "What's your name?" Aldric asked. "Finn," the boy whispered, shaking. "Finn," Aldric repeated, steady and sure. "Look at me." The boy did, eyes brimming. "I will not let any harm come to your sister. Stay here with the guards, you have my word." The king rose, eyes already scanning the swirling snow beyond the gate. Lucian glanced at him. "You're going out there alone." "As king," Aldric said, "I am never alone." He stepped through the gate and into the open, the sounds of battle muffled by the thick curtain of falling snow. The rogues were close now, lean forms weaving between the trees, eyes gleaming. They were desperate, hungry, drawn by the warmth and food of the village. But they would find neither weakness nor cruelty here. His wolf rose fully then, not as a wild storm, but as a controlled tide. His body shifted in a pulse of power, armor straining, nails lengthening into claws, his senses sharpening until he could count every heartbeat in the field. The world narrowed to cold air, pounding footsteps and the weight of duty. He met the first rogue head-on, not with savage fury, but with precise, economical strength. He sidestepped a lunge, pushed his opponent into the snow, and pinned him with a warning growl rather than a killing blow. The second circled, uncertain, then charged. Aldric turned, using his shoulder to redirect the attack and sending the wolf sprawling harmlessly into a drift. "Leave this land," he commanded, his voice layered with alpha power. "There is still a path for you that does not end in chains." The rogues hesitated. Even corrupted by long months of hunger and isolation, they felt the weight of a king who fought not to destroy, but to protect. One of them snarled and bolted into the forest, fleeing back into the shadows. The others followed, breaking like a wave against a cliff, disappearing among the trees. Aldric stood there for a moment, chest rising and falling, snow catching in his hair and lashes. His wolf wanted to pursue, to ensure the threat was gone. But another sound caught his attention, a faint, ragged breathing nearby, too small and uneven to belong to a warrior. He turned his head toward the sound. There, half hidden behind a broken cart just beyond the gate, lay a little girl in a tattered cloak, Finn's sister. Her ankle was twisted, one hand pressed to her chest as she struggled to breathe. When she saw him, fear flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else when she realized who he was. "You came," she whispered. Aldric shifted back enough to soften his features, letting his claws shrink, his stance relax. He moved slowly, so as not to startle her, and knelt. With careful hands he lifted her from the snow, his movements surprisingly gentle for someone with such strength. Her head rested against his chest, and he could feel the rapid hammer of her heart. "I gave your brother my word," he said, "and I do not break my promises." As he carried her back through the gate, the villagers watched in silence. They saw not just the ruthless Alpha King, but the man who picked up a frightened child as if she were the most important life in the world. In their eyes, respect deepened into something warmer, quieter. Trust. Back in the courtyard, Finn ran forward, tears streaming as he reached for his sister. Aldric carefully set the girl down, stepping back to let them cling to each other. For a brief moment, a softness settled across his face. Then, as always, he pulled the mask back on. "Lucian," he said, not taking his eyes off the siblings, "double the patrols on the eastern ridge. The rogues are growing bolder." Lucian nodded, then hesitated. "Aldric, there's something else. A message came while you were at the wall. The elders are calling a council at dawn. They say it's urgent. Something about the old prophecy and—" Before he could finish, another horn rang out, not the sharp alarm of attack, but a long, somber note that hadn't sounded in years. Warriors froze. Servants looked up from their tasks. The sound slid through the castle like a cold knife of memory. "That's the border gate signal," Lucian said slowly, disbelief creeping into his voice. "It only plays when a royal bloodline returns or a banished name steps onto our land." Aldric felt his wolf jolt, a sudden, restless stirring deep inside him that had nothing to do with danger. His heartbeat, usually so steady, stumbled once. He forced his legs to move, walking toward the inner gates that opened to the main road. Lucien walked beside him, his expression tightening with each echo of the horn. Snow swirled as the gates creaked open. On the road beyond, a small group of travelers stood at the edge of the torchlight, exhausted, cloaked faces turned toward the looming castle. At the front, a woman in a deep blue cloak stepped forward, her posture straight despite the weariness in her shoulders. Wind caught her hood and pulled it back. Copper-brown hair tumbled over her shoulders, catching the torch glow like fire. Her eyes swept the courtyard sharp, observant, carrying a storm of things unsaid. There was strength in the way she held her chin, but also a tiredness that spoke of long roads and longer battles. She looked up at the towering castle, then at the man standing in its center. Aldric's wolf, silent through 100 rejections, surged up with a force that nearly stole his breath. The world narrowed to the space between them. The snow, the torches, the murmurs of the crowd, all of it faded beneath one overwhelming, impossible truth beating like a drum against his ribs. Mine. The word wasn't spoken aloud, but it roared inside him, wild and undeniable. Beside him, Lucien's voice broke, hoarse with shock. Aldric, that's her. That's my sister. The Alpha King, who had rejected every woman the moon goddess placed before him, stood frozen in the snow, caught between the vow that had kept his kingdom safe and the first woman his soul had ever answered. He took one step toward her, controls slipping at the edges for the first time in years. And in that single step, he felt his entire carefully built world begin to crack. The girl who came home to legend. Snowflakes clung to the woman's lashes as she stepped fully into the courtyard, and in that quiet moment, it felt as if the whole kingdom was watching the same breath of air hang between her and the Alpha King. The guards, the servants, the children peeking from behind their mothers' skirts, none of them knew why the air suddenly felt heavier. They only knew their king had gone still in a way they had never seen. Lucien moved first. He strode through the snow, his usual easy confidence cracking into something raw and boyish. "Ilara," he said, voice shaking with a kind of joy that hurt to listen to. He pulled her into his arms, nearly lifting her off the ground. She laughed, a short, breathless sound that chased some of the tension from the air. "Careful, Lucien, you'll crush my ribs," she murmured against his shoulder. When she stepped back, she punched his arm lightly. "You didn't answer any of my last letters. I thought the mighty Beta had forgotten his little sister." "If you'd seen my desk, you'd know it's the letters that buried me," he answered, eyes shining. "You're really here, after all this time." Aldric watched, every muscle locked. Up close, Ilara was not the fragile memory of a girl he vaguely recalled from years ago. She was taller, still slender but stronger, her hands calloused beneath the frayed edges of her gloves. A faint white line curved along her temple, a small scar half hidden by her hair. There was history in that mark. Pain, survival, and something eerily familiar. She turned at last, as if feeling his gaze. Their eyes met. For Aldric, the world narrowed to the color of her irises, clear and bright, like the last patch of sky before a storm rolls in. His wolf surged again, claws against the inside of his ribs, pressing, demanding he move, speak, claim. The bond hummed between them, wild and new and terrifyingly right. For her, the first feeling was not wonder. It was a sharp jolt of recognition, followed by a wave of anger she didn't quite understand. The stories she'd heard of him on the road, the ruthless rejections, the cold command, the king who turned away every mate the goddess offered, rose like a shield inside her. So she did what any girl who had spent her life learning not to be ruled by other people's power would do. She straightened her spine and met the Alpha King's gaze without flinching. "Your Majesty," she said, voice steady, respectful but not small. "Thank you for allowing us passage through your lands." Lucien shot her a warning look. Aldric caught the subtle tremor in her hands, the fatigue carved into the corners of her mouth. They had traveled far and hard to reach his gates. His instincts urged him to step closer, to ease her burden, to wrap her in warmth and safety until every line of strain disappeared from her face. Instead, he let his training speak first. "You are welcome in Red Moon," he replied. "The gates of my kingdom open to Lucian's blood. You and your companions will rest here tonight." He glanced at the shivering group behind her, an elderly woman leaning on a cane, a couple carrying a sleeping child, two young men with travel-worn cloaks and wary eyes. "You came with a caravan?" Lucian asked, confusion knitting his brow. "Where's your escort from the Southern Valley?" Illyra's jaw flexed before she answered. "We had one. The rogues at the river crossing decided they needed our horses more than we did." Lucian swore under his breath. "You fought rogues with a handful of travelers." "We made it here, didn't we?" she said, a wry lift to her mouth. "Not all battles are about strength. Some are about knowing when to run and when to stand your ground." That answer stirred an unexpected warmth in Aldric. He signaled to the nearest captain. "See that they are given food, dry clothes, and a place by the fire," he ordered. "No one who braves rogue territory to reach my gates will sleep cold under my watch." As the travelers were led toward the inner keep, Illyra paused, glancing back once. Her gaze slid past the towering walls, the banners, the curious faces, and landed on the little boy from earlier, Finn, who was still clutching his sister's hand. They looked at her with open, wondering eyes, as if she were some kind of hero for simply walking through the snow. Illyra smiled at them, soft and genuine, and in that small curve of her lips, Aldric saw the Luna his people had begged the goddess for. Not a crown, not a title, but someone who could turn fear into calm with nothing but a look. He also saw the danger. To her, to the kingdom, to the fragile balance he'd spent years building over the volcano of his own power. Lucian cleared his throat. "We should get inside before we all freeze," he said, clapping a hand to Aldric's shoulder in that easy, familiar way. "There's a council at dawn, and I'd like at least a few hours of sleep before the elders start complaining." That word, council, pulled Aldric back to the colder part of reality. The elders, the prophecy, the reason his chest felt tight even when he stood in the open air. In the great hall, fire roared in the massive stone hearth, filling the space with crackling warmth and the smell of burning pine. Illyra's group huddled close to the flames, steam rising from their damp cloaks. Servants moved quietly around them with bowls of stew and bread still warm from the ovens. Illyra removed her cloak, and the flickering light caught on the embroidery at her collar, simple but careful little threads of silver shaped like crescent moons. She handed the bowl of stew given to her to the older woman first, ignoring her own shivering fingers. "Eat," Illyra murmured. "You haven't had a full meal in 2 days." The woman protested weakly, but Illyra shook her head, a stubborn tenderness in the line of her mouth that reminded Aldric painfully of Lucian. These were not people used to being led by an alpha. They were used to being carried by someone who knew what it meant to be tired and keep going anyway. Lucian watched her with a fond, exasperated pride. "She's been like that since we were kids," he said quietly to Aldric. "Always giving away her last piece of bread, her last coin, her last dry cloak. Drove my father mad." "Kindness is not madness," Aldric replied, eyes never leaving Illyra's face. "It's what keeps kingdoms from rotting." Lucian's expression sobered. "Then maybe it's good she's here. This place, it's been getting colder, Aldric, not just the weather." Before Aldric could answer, Illyra looked up and caught them watching. Instead of dropping her gaze, she rose and crossed the hall, stopping at a respectful distance. The firelight painted gold along her cheekbones, but her eyes stayed cool, assessing. "I wanted to thank you," she said to Aldric, "for sending an escort with that girl earlier, the one you carried through the gate." "You saw that?" he asked. "It's not every day one witnesses a king carrying a child through a storm," she replied. "Most kings I've met prefer to be carried themselves." Lucian snorted. "Careful, Ilara, that's treason in at least 3 kingdoms." She smiled faintly, then sobered. "I've traveled through pacts where the weak were treated like broken tools, where rogues attacked because they were starving, not cruel. You may have a cold reputation, Your Majesty, but I've seen colder hearts in much warmer lands." The compliment, if it was one, hit differently than any flattery he'd received. It came wrapped in honesty, not fear. "I do what I must to keep my people safe," Aldric said. "Sometimes that looks colder than it is." Her gaze lingered on his for a heartbeat longer than was strictly proper. "Sometimes safety and kindness aren't enemies," she answered quietly. "Sometimes they're the same sword, just held by a steadier hand." His wolf leaned toward her words like a man toward a fire after years of winter. Aldric forced himself another step back, putting emotional distance where physical distance failed. "You should rest," he said. "The roads you crossed are not kind." "They're honest," she murmured. "You always know where you stand with a storm or a steep cliff." Her eyes flicked to him again, unreadable. "People are harder." With that, she turned away and returned to her companions. Lucian let out a low whistle. "You realize she doesn't talk to anyone like that, right? You're special." Aldric shot him a look. "Don't start." "Start what?" Lucian asked, too quickly. "She's my sister, Aldric. I know exactly how she looks at men she thinks are fools." "And how is that?" "Like they're furniture," Lucian grinned. She looks at like you're a puzzle she didn't ask for but can't ignore." Aldric's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Because deep down, beneath years of discipline and fear, a part of him wanted to be that puzzle. Wanted to be studied, understood, chosen, not in spite of his darkness, but with full knowledge of it. Later, when the hall had quieted and the fires burned low, Aldric found himself walking the empty corridors instead of sleeping. The castle felt different with Ilara inside its walls. Softer at the edges, more alive. It unsettled him. He paused near a balcony overlooking the inner courtyard. There, in the quiet blue of late night, he spotted a lone figure sitting on the low stone wall, cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Ilara. She was staring up at the moon, its light turning the snow to silver glass. Her expression was far away, somewhere between homesickness and stubborn hope. Without fully deciding to, Aldric stepped out onto the balcony. His boots made almost no sound on the stone, but she tensed anyway, sensing him. "I thought kings slept," she said softly, not turning around. "I thought travelers did," he answered. "You've crossed half the continent. Your body must be exhausted." "It is," she admitted. "My mind is." He moved to stand a careful distance away, leaning his forearms on the railing. Below them, the courtyard lay quiet, only the faint creak of ice and the distant howl of a patrol breaking the silence. "What keeps you awake?" he asked. "The same thing that brought me back," she said after a moment. "A question I don't know how to answer." He waited. The moonlight made her look almost otherworldly, but the small crease between her brows was very human. "When I left this place," she continued slowly, "I promised myself I would never belong to anyone's power again. Not to a prophecy, not to an alpha, not to a history I didn't choose. I've spent years building a life made of my own choices, small as they were." She finally turned her head, eyes searching his face. "And now I stand here, in the heart of the kingdom that shaped my childhood, looking at the man everyone swears the moon goddess won't leave alone. I feel," she broke off, shaking her head. "I'm not sure I like the feeling." The bond between them pulsed, insistent. Aldric knew what she felt, because he felt it too. The pull, the recognition, the terrifying sense that a door had opened inside them both and could never be fully closed again. "Ilara," he began, voice low, There are things about our past, about why you left, that you may not fully know." Before he could say more, a bell tolled from the tower above them. 1, 2, 3 deep, echoing chimes. The signal for dawn council. Ilara's mouth tightened. "The elders," she said. "I wondered how long it would take them." Aldric straightened, the brief, fragile intimacy between them splintering beneath the weight of duty. "They asked for a council," he said. "I didn't know you would arrive the night before." She gave a humorless little smile. The moon goddess has a cruel sense of timing. As the final bell echo faded into the morning sky, Aldric realized something with a cold clarity that cut through even the warmth of the bond. By the time the sun set again, the elders would know Lucian's sister was back. They would see the way his wolf reacted to her, and they wouldn't see hope in it. They would see danger. He looked at Ilara, standing alone on the balcony, cloaked in silver light and an independence she'd fought hard to earn. His heart, his wolf, and his duty all pulled in different directions at once. And as they walked toward the council chamber together, side by side yet worlds apart, Aldric could not shake the feeling that the truth about their shared past, still locked behind the elders' guarded eyes, was about to tear open everything he thought he knew about himself, his kingdom, and her. The night the snow ran red. The council chamber always smelled faintly of old smoke and older arguments. Stone walls rose high around the circular room, hung with faded banners from battles won long before Aldric was born. A round table sat at its center, carved from a single massive oak, its surface scarred by generations of fists, cups, and restless fingers. As Aldric entered with Lucian and Ilara, the elders were already seated. Gray heads, sharp eyes, voices that could bless or ruin reputations with a few carefully chosen words. Their gazes slid over Lucian, lingered on Ilara, then fixed on Aldric with a mixture of expectation and thinly veiled frustration. Elder Maron, his beard white as the snow outside, spoke first. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head with the exact angle required by tradition. "We thank you for answering the council's summons." "I live in the same castle, Maron," Aldric replied, taking his seat at the head of the table. "You did not summon me so much as request I walk down a hallway." A few of the younger advisors hid smiles. Maron did not. His gaze shifted to Ilara. "And you," he said, voice cooling, "are a surprise we did not ask for." Lucian's jaw flexed. "Careful," he warned quietly. "That's my sister you're speaking to." Ilara, however, didn't flinch. "I didn't come for your sake, Elder," she said, tone polite but firm. "I came to return home for a while, whether you consider that a blessing or a problem is between you and your prayers." Maron's lips thinned, but another elder, a woman named Sira with ink-dark hair streaked in silver, raised a hand. "Enough," she said. "We are not here to trade insults. We are here because signs that have slept for years are waking." She turned to Aldric. "The rogues are growing bolder. The omens in the fire have changed. And last night, the horn of returning bloodline sounded for the first time since—" Her eyes flickered briefly to Ilara. "Since the night the snow ran red." A hush fell. Lucian's hand, resting on the table, curled into a fist. Ilara's gaze dropped for the first time since entering the chamber. Aldric kept his face carefully blank, but inside, that phrase cut deep. It was the name the elders had given to his greatest shame, the night his control had shattered on a battlefield at the edge of their lands. He had thought he knew every dark corner of that memory. Apparently, he didn't. "What does any of this have to do with Lucian's sister returning?" he asked, his voice edged with steel. Sira glanced at Maron, then back at Aldric. "Because she was there that night, Your Majesty," she said quietly, "and because of what the seers saw in the blood that fell." Ilara's fingers tightened on the back of the chair she stood behind. "You told me I was sent away to heal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That leaving the pack was for my own safety. You never said it was because of a prophecy." Meron sighed, as if greatly burdened. "Child, when you were taken from the battlefield, you were not just hurt, you were marked." The scar on her temple seemed to glow under their scrutiny. Aldric's gaze locked on it, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "What do you mean marked?" he asked. Sira drew a breath. On the night the young Alpha lost control, his power lashed out in all directions. Warriors on both sides fell to their knees, crippled by the force of it. But where most were pushed away or knocked unconscious, one small girl, Lucian's sister, was struck differently. The seers said the boy king's power entered her, burned through her, and left something behind. Alara looked faint. "I remember flashes," she admitted. "The sky, the noise, Lucian shouting my name, then pain like my skull was splitting in two. I woke up days later in a healer's hut, far from here. They said I'd been lucky." "You were," Sira said. "Lucky to live, lucky to carry only a scar and not madness. But the seers also saw another path. They saw that the girl who survived the Alpha's rage would one day stand before him again. And when she did, his fate and the fate of the kingdom would balance on what lived in her blood." Lucian swore under his breath. "You sent her away because you were afraid of a child, of a vision." "We sent her away to give both her and your Alpha a chance to grow before destiny forced their paths to cross," Meron snapped. "You think it was easy to tell your mother her daughter must leave. We made a choice we believed would keep the pack safe." Aldric's voice was quiet when he spoke, but it silenced every other sound in the room. "Why was I never told?" Sira's gaze softened. "Because guilt already pressed you low. You punished yourself more harshly than any elder could. We believed knowing there was a child shaped by your loss of control would break you." Her words struck hard because they carried a truth he couldn't deny. After that night, he had built his life on two pillars: control and atonement. He had trained until his body shook, studied until his eyes blurred, led until his own needs were last in every decision. He had refused every mate, not because he thought himself above them, but because he believed no one was safe offering their heart to a man who had once shattered his own people with the force of his power. And all this time, the living reminder of that night had been walking under other skies, carrying a piece of him in her blood. Alara swallowed hard. "So what exactly did your seers say would happen when I returned?" she asked. Meron hesitated, then recited from memory, his voice taking on the slow cadence of prophecy. "When the girl with the scar of the Alpha's wrath stands again beneath his moon, the king will face a choice of fire and mercy. If he binds his heart to hers in fear, the kingdom will burn. If he binds it in faith, the shadows will starve. If he turns away from what is written, both will fall." Silence crashed down. Alara looked from the elders to Aldric, horror and defiance warring in her eyes. "So that's it," she whispered. "You look at me and see a warning label on legs, a walking disaster the goddess tossed into your neat plans." Sira's expression twisted with something like regret. "We see a convergence of power that could save or destroy what we've built," she said. "We see danger and possibility." Lucian rose halfway from his chair. "You see my sister," he growled, "and my king, two people who have bled for this pack. Maybe try starting there." Aldric finally stood, the scraping of his chair on stone like thunder in the confined space. His gaze swept over the elders, cold and sharp as winter wind. "You kept this from me," he said. "You made choices about my life, my guilt, and her future without asking either of us. That will not happen again." Meron opened his mouth to protest, but Aldric's voice rose, carrying the full weight of his rank. "You will not speak of Alara as if she were a weapon misplaced in your armory. She is a person, a member of this pack, my Beta's sister." His throat tightened on the last words, but he forced himself to say them. "And possibly more." Alara's breath hitched. Lucian's eyes widened. The elders exchanged glances heavy with meaning. "Your Majesty," Sira said carefully, "we do not forbid what the moon goddess decrees, but we must urge caution. You have spent years holding your power in check. The bond with a true mate amplifies an alpha, for better or worse. If your first loss of control nearly shattered our borders, then my first true acceptance of who I am might do the opposite," Aldric cut in. "You fear what I could become if I surrender to this bond. I fear what I will become if I spend the rest of my life running from it." The room pulsed with the weight of his words. He turned then, finally, to face Alara fully. "You deserved the truth," he said quietly. "About that night, about why you were sent away, about how my power touched your life before you were old enough to choose." Her eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with the sting of 1,000 questions finally named. "What do you remember?" she asked. "From that night?" He took a slow breath. "I remember the enemy Alpha breaking through our line. I remember seeing Lucian, younger, sword too heavy in his hand, standing between that Alpha and a little girl." He swallowed. "I remember fear like I'd never felt. I thought I was about to watch my best friend die." His hands curled at his sides, the memory still sharp. "Something in me snapped. My wolf surged to the surface, and I didn't know how to hold him then. Power rushed out in every direction. I remember warriors falling, ears bleeding from the force of my roar. I remember you on the ground, blood on your face, Lucian screaming your name. I remember thinking I'd killed you." Alara's fingers rose unconsciously to touch her scar. The room faded around them. In that moment, it was just two versions of the same memory, finally meeting. "I don't remember you as a monster," she said softly. "I remember you dragging me behind you when the enemy Alpha tried to reach me. Even half out of your mind, you put yourself between me and the danger. I remember that more than the pain." Something in Aldric's chest loosened, so long bound up in knots of shame that he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe easily. "You see yourself as the worst thing that happened that night," she went on, voice gaining strength. "But for me, you were also the reason I survived it." The elders shifted uneasily. This was not the narrative they had nourished for years in the shadows of their fears. Maron cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, the prophecy remains. We do not say you cannot be bound. We say you must be certain of the heart with which you choose one another. Fear will twist this bond into something dangerous. Faith alone will make it a blessing." Faith, the word hung in the air between Aldric and Alara like a bridge made of glass, beautiful, fragile, and terrifying to step onto. Before either of them could speak, the council doors slammed open. A young scout stumbled in, cloak torn, face flushed from running. "Your Majesty," he gasped, dropping to one knee. "We captured a rogue at the northern border. He claims he serves a shadow alpha gathering the scattered packs. He says they're not just hunting food anymore." Aldric's senses sharpened. "What are they hunting?" The scout swallowed, eyes darting nervously toward Alara. "He said they're looking for the girl with fire in her blood, the one touched by a king's wrath." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Alara's hand fell from her scar, curling into a fist at her side. Lucian's chair toppled as he surged to his feet. And Aldric felt his wolf rise, not with blind rage this time, but with a focused, protective fury he had never known. Whoever had sent those rogues, they were coming for her. And for the first time, the Alpha King realized that turning away from his bond would not keep her safe. It might be the very thing that left her defenseless.